Okay, we are just about ready to get started here. We want to thank everyone for taking their time today to join us for today's webinar. My name is Dominic Morrow. Again, I am the Marketing Director here at Extra Duty Solutions. And today, the presentation's topic is around how to create a fair and efficient extra duty job awarding process. We're really excited to get started. We have a lot to discuss in a short amount of time. So let's just go ahead and get started here. We're going to go ahead and start with a few house rules. Just to let everybody know, we will be sending a link of the recorded version of today's webinar to you guys via email. So this will be a great webinar on demand at any time and share amongst your colleagues. The presentation itself will be available. You guys should be able to see that on the bottom below. There's some downloadable content, including that PDF, as well as our full presentation. So feel free to download that and share it amongst your agency as well. And then we're also going to have a Q&A session at the end of today's event. So feel free to submit your questions in the chat box below. And we're going to go ahead and try to answer all those questions at the end of the webinar today. And lastly, we have an opportunity to schedule a one-on-one consultation, and that will be shared at the end of today's presentation after the Q&A. So if you are interested in learning more about extra duty solutions or looking for more best practices for a fair job awarding process to implement in your department, feel free to sign up for a consultation. Just let us know in the chat box below that you are interested in learning more. So let's get into today's agenda. The first item for today, we're going to be evaluating the pros and cons of the first come, first served approach. Secondly, a look into how agencies utilize point systems to fairly assign extra duty job opportunities. Third, evaluating the different types of rotation lists and how they should be deployed. Number four, a call for using multiple fairness algorithms for those who are looking for a hybrid approach. And then when we come towards the end of today's webinar, we're going to share and highlight our preferred methods to ensure a fair and accurate job awarding process. And lastly, as discussed earlier, we do have some time allocated for a Q&A, so make sure you get your questions in at the end. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass it along to our presenter today, Rich Milliman, who is the CEO of Extra Duty Solutions. Rich will give you a few insights into his background and go forward with today's presentation. So without further ado, Rich, go ahead and take the reins.
Dom, thanks. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. As Dom said, I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Extra Duty Solutions. My background is more in operations and risk management. We actually, the co-founders of Extra Duty Solutions, utilize extra duty officers in our prior worlds, and as in doing so, realize some of the inefficiencies that exist both on the corporate side and the law enforcement side in operating these programs, and that led to the founding of Extra Duty Solutions. So I'd like to go forward now and start talking about the different scheduling algorithms that we see out in the marketplace. There's almost as many scheduling algorithms as there are police departments. Everybody seems to do this a little bit differently. But if you step back and squint, you're going to see three types of scheduling algorithms that are very, very common. In fact, out of the 60 to 70 departments that we administer the extra duty programs on, I would say that 45 to 50 use one or more variations in the following three methods. The first method is simply called the first come, first serve approach. And in that approach, as the name implies, a job comes in, it gets communicated out to the officers, and the first officer that says, I'll take it, I'll work that job, gets the job. So it's simple beyond belief, and that's the main pro. You hardly ever hear complaining in the hallways of, why did Joe get that job? I should have got that job. It's very simple. Joe signed up before you did. So that's the main pro of the first come, first serve approach. However, there are some pretty big cons with it. The first con is there is an inherent bias in almost all first come, first serve approaches, not in the scheduling of the job, but in the communication of the jobs. It's very hard to communicate the jobs in such a way that doesn't create a bias. Excuse me. The most common biases first are, where are you communicating the job? So you see a lot of departments where A job comes in, they write it on a piece of paper, a predetermined form of some type, and put it on the wall in the hallway. Well, if you happen not to be in that hallway at that time, you are at a disadvantage for signing up for that job. An officer who happens to be walking down that hallway when it gets posted has an inherent advantage of getting the job over you, or somebody who's not working that shift, who's not working that day even, right? The second bias is, when are the details communicated? So often you'll see a department using a first come first serve approach where, to make it quote unquote fair, they'll post all the jobs at the same time each day, say 4 p.m. Well, that's fine if at 4 p.m. you happen to be awake in that hallway where they're posted, or looking at the computer when they're posted online. But if you're sleeping at that time, or you're a day off, or you're not in the department, then
as well as our full.
The other disadvantage or con of this approach is the response time will affect who gets the job. So an officer, if you're using software to do this, who's constantly on the software, constantly on the phone, looking at an app, and sees the notification that a job just came out, has an advantage over an officer who's not constantly on his phone or constantly in that hallway that we talked about. The final con is, if you're using an in-house coordinator, an in-house coordinator would be an officer who's taking the calls, who's fielding the calls from customers requesting extra duty services. There's typically a bias there. In fact, I'll give you one example where an officer complained that another officer was getting way more opportunities to work extra duty than he was, simply because he sat on the left side of
looking for more best
rather than the right side. The officer that took the calls was right-handed. His phone was to the right of his body at his desk, and would pick up the phone, talk to the customer about what the need was, and then turn to the right and say, "Joe, can you work tomorrow?" So Joe got a ton of jobs, but Steve, who was seated to his left, got nothing. So there's a lot of inherent biases in the
come first served approach.
in this approach. So let's talk about the next approach. Another very common way of scheduling is a point system, and there are multiple variations of point systems. But a basic point system, you basically get 1 point per something. Usually that something is per hour worked extra duty or per dollar earned extra duty. And then typically what happens is, when a detail comes in, it gets communicated out. It is
our preferred
quote open for a certain amount of time. In the open period, officers can request to work the detail, and the officer requesting the detail who has the lowest points gets the detail. Typically the points go to 0 at some point.
At the end
Happens not annually, some other time period. So say you have a list that goes to 0 on January 1st. That list will be ordered in some way on January 1st. It could be randomly, it could be by seniority, it could be by tenure, or some other way. But there's a beginning of the period ordering. So if it's by seniority, the most senior person has the first crack at the first detail that comes in on January 1st. In a busy or larger department, by January 15th, the order of that list is unrecognizable, because everybody has earned a number of points from the details they've worked. So officers are then assigned points by hours worked or dollars earned. The ordering of that list keeps changing based on how many points everybody has. And then again on January 1st, utilize basically how our point system works. Now, there are multiple variations on a point system. So the first variation is the go-to 0. The start point of the period may not be annually, it may be quarterly or monthly. The benefit of doing that, and some people consider this fair, some people consider it not fair, but the benefit is that you can't have any officer who gets too far ahead, if you will. By ahead, I mean an officer who, say, doesn't want to work in the summer heat on road jobs, earns no points over the summer because he hasn't worked, and all of a sudden the fall comes around and he has much lower number of points than everybody else, and he can take whatever jobs he wants. So if you go to 0 quarterly or monthly, you're avoiding that problem. Another variation is how many runs per day or cycle do you have to sign up for a job? So what I mean by that is, let's say I didn't work at all this year and it's November 1st. I have 0 points. Everybody else in the department has at least 100 points because they've been working. On November 1st, a job comes out and it's an 8-hour job, therefore it's worth 8 points. I have 0 points, so I can take it. The next job comes out, it's another 8-hour job. I have 8 points, everybody else has at least 100. I can take it. I can take the third job and the fourth job, and I can take all the jobs until I catch up to everybody else. So internally, we call this the Christmas money problem. And the reason we call it that is in every department, there's going to be some small number of people who, of sworn officers who are working extra duty details to get Christmas money. And if you're using a point system that goes to 0 annually, they have an inherent advantage to get as much money as they want basically at Christmas time. There are some ways around that, but that's a common problem. The next variation is what's called staggered or reverse staggered point systems. And there's, even within staggered and reverse staggered, there's multiple variations. But basically what that is instead of getting 1 point per dollar earned or per hour worked, you get a different number of points depending on who you are. So for example, we have one department where if you have 20 or more years of tenure in that department, you get 1 point. Time you are at a distance, you get 2 points. 15 or 16 years, you get 4 points, and so on down the list. And if you're new to 2 years, you get 10 points. So such a system will favor the more tenured officers. They'll get their pick of the litter on the extra duty jobs. A reverse staggered point does the exact opposite way. And we have another department we have a couple departments that do this, where the less tenured people have it's favored in their direction. And the logic behind that is they need the money more, they get paid less. So that's another variation. Another variation or question is new officers, what happens to them? So if you go to 0 on January 1st and only January 1st, do the new officers start with the maximum number of points, or 0 points, or somewhere in the middle? And again, there's no right answer. It just depends what you think is fair. But if it's July 1st and everybody's got a bunch of points and has been working for the year, and you have a new officer come in and he's assigned 0 points, he has a huge advantage over everybody for the rest of that year until you get to 0 again. Another variation is what we call sales. Sales are no point jobs. So there may be certain jobs that are undesirable. People don't want to work them. These could be last minute jobs that popped up at the last minute. It could be emergency jobs at 3 a.m. in the dead of winter. Or it could be a difficult to work for customer. But it's in some departments, there are certain types of details where you don't earn points. It's to incent officers to take those details, even though they're less attractive. The third type of common way of scheduling details I'd like to talk about is rotation lists. And again, there's variations on rotation lists. But the way a rotation list works basically is details are offered to officers based on some pre-ordered list. So the top officer is offered a detail first. If that officer doesn't want it, the second officer gets a crack, then the third, then the fourth, on down the list. There's 2 basic types of rotation lists. A static. So there's a lot of a static rotation list means your position never changes, other than if there's a new officer that joins the force or somebody of details. The person ahead of you and the person behind you on the list are always ahead of you and always behind you. And these lists are sometimes called circles or wheels because the pointer changes as to who's up next on that list, but that pointer just keeps going around as if in a circle, but you don't move on the list. In a live list, you move. So a live list, let's say I'm at the top of the list and a detail comes out, I am offered it and I don't want it. The second guy takes it. The second guy now goes to the bottom of the list, but I'm still at the top of the list. And I will remain there getting the first crack at every single detail until one comes along that I like and I take, and then I go to the bottom of the list. So those are the 2 basic variations. Beyond that, there's other variations on rotation lists. One is the number of rounds. So a round is exhausting the rotation list. A job comes in, or the day's jobs come in, and at some point you quote unquote run the rotation list. So you run through to see who wants what job and how they get assigned. You can request to work the detail, where everybody can select one job, and then you've exhausted your rotation list, and that's it. Nobody can take more than one job on the rotation list. So there are some departments that will do one round followed by a switch to first come, first serve. So everybody gets a crack at the job they want most. If there's leftover jobs after everybody had their crack, the first people that want them take them. Another variation that we've seen is 2 or more rounds followed by some other method of assigning the job or divvying up the job. So we have one department where they do 2 rounds to the rotation list, so everybody can take up to 2 jobs. And then if there are leftover jobs that theoretically nobody wanted, they are now offered to special or reserve officers. We have a department where we administer the program where we do that. We actually do a combination of these first 2. We do 2 rounds. Any detail that's not picked up is first come, first serve for an hour. Any detail that's not picked up then goes to specials and reserves. Any detail that's still not picked up now goes to an outside agency that has an MOU with the home agency. Another variation is unlimited rounds. You keep circulating through that rotation list until every single job is taken, or there's jobs left over, meaning nobody is willing to work those jobs. And then you do whatever you do with those types of jobs. The other variation is number rotation list. So typically we see one rotation list. I would say 85% of departments that use rotation lists just have one list, but not all. So we've seen multiple rotation lists. You can have A, B, C, D, depending on, are you working day shift, night shift, off? I've seen departments that have one rotation list for people who are working 5-2 and another rotation for people who are working 4-4. I know of one department that has about 27 officers in it, and they have 14 rotation lists. And I'm quite certain that none of the 27 officers understand exactly how that program works. So you can get insanely complex to the, to the point where you have to be a NASA engineer to understand it without a lot of benefit. So you can get crazy with the rotation lists, and typically it's not worth it. There's other variations and other methods, and let's just sort of go through these quickly. One is a seniority-based list. So this is fairly simple, but it comes with a lot of complaining typically. The most senior person gets the first crack at every single job, followed by the second most senior, third most senior on down the list. It's not a common way of doing it, but we've seen it. Next, 0 points. Everybody else means that, let's say we use a point system, and I take a job. Up until a certain time, it may be 6 or 12 hours before that job starts, any officer more senior than me, or perhaps more tenured than me, can bump me off of that and take the job. So that's essentially what bumping is. There's, as you can imagine, a lot of complaining that comes with bumping. The third variation is a first come, first serve with time limits. So that means a job gets communicated out, or jobs get communicated out, and anybody can just sign up for those jobs up until a certain time. That time may be midnight tonight, or it may be 12 hours before the job starts, and then something else happens. That something else is typically, if nobody signed up for the job, it goes to a neighboring agency or something like that. A third variation, this is actually a different type of scheduling, is called pick list or pick schedules. A pick schedule means every officer is assigned a time to either physically go sign up for a job, go in a room and pick a job, or go on software and pick a job. So one officer may be at 9 a.m., one officer may be at 9:10, one officer may be at 9:20. And again, the number of times that you run through that list and the specific times that each officer has can change daily or annually or whatever, so multiple variations. With one of the most basic variations on the pick schedule is it open or close. An open schedule means if it's my time at 9 a.m. to go in and pick a job, anytime after 9 a.m. I can go in there. A closed means that you're going to have a start and an end time. So I might be able to go in from 9 to 9:10. And if I don't pick my job between 9 and 9:10, again, in the software or in a physical location, that's the same thing as saying I don't want to work. I don't want to pick a job that day. So if it's an open list and I don't go into 11 a.m. to pick my job, all the people that could go in at 9, 9:10, 9:20, 9:30, 9:40, and so on, have all gone before me, even though I had the right to go before them at 9 o'clock. Again, these come with arguments. And then a final variation is a forced assignment, and there's multiple variations of forced assignments, but forced assignment basically means that officers sign up for when they're willing to work details, or they are assigned details based on when they're willing to work and when they're not working on duty. So we have some departments that we administer the programs for where the officer doesn't pick which particular job he or she wants. They pick when they're willing to work. And if a job becomes available in that time period, they may get that job based on a rotation list or a point system or some other way. But it's based on them signing up for a time period as opposed to a particular job. Some departments use multiple algorithms all at the same time. And again, you can imagine how many variations there are of this, but the two most common methods in using multiple algorithms are you use one for traffic control or road jobs and one for security detail. Or you use one for planned jobs that you know are coming up, and they could be security jobs or road jobs. So you may have a bridge project that's going on for 6 months, and you know that there's going to be 4 officers needed each weekday for the next 6 months, and even though it's a road job, it's a planned job. And then your security jobs, and another method for ASAP jobs. So to give you an example, and a detail comes out, the security jobs are posted or made aware or communicated out to the office. And I take the 1st through the 10th of every month for the following month. So June 1 through 10, all security jobs, known jobs for the month of July, are available to view and available to sign up for. On the or not sign up for, but say a request. On the morning of the 10th, all those jobs are awarded based on a point system. At the same time, jobs that are not known that come up for today, for tomorrow, or today for today, typically road jobs or emergency jobs, those are assigned on a first come, first served basis, and there's no point allocation for those jobs. So that's an example of using more than one rotation list. So we're often asked, well, what works? What should we do? And as is often the case in life, there is no one right answer, but there are some principles that will help you pick a scheduling algorithm that will result in less headaches. The two principles that you want to keep in mind are keep it simple and keep it transparent. Those are the most important things above all. So when you apply those principles to what we talked about, a basic point system, 1 point per hour worked or 1 point per dollar earned, or a single rotation list, whether it's static or not static, are typically what we say are the best scheduling algorithms out there. And best being defined as they cause the least amount of headaches, the least arguments, the least union grievances, the least misunderstandings. They're easy, everybody understands them. We have one department with between 700 and 800 officers that uses a basic point system, and there are never ever any complaints or arguments. We have other departments with less than 35 officers that use multiple rotation lists, and nobody understands how it works, and there's constant complaining. So simple and transparent. When I say simple, if you have something that's complex, think of it like having a complex tax code. If it's unduly, so everybody gets a crack at the job they want in Switzerland, and paying expensive tax lawyers to figure out loopholes, and you will have gaming of the system. And that is exactly what happens with a complex scheduling algorithm. There will be a subset of officers that figure out some little hole or nook and cranny and start gaming the system, and that will get discovered. And typically that results in even more problems, because the most common thing that happens when it gets discovered is a Band-Aid is thrown on top. That has an MOU with the home agent gaming the system, and a Band-Aid is thrown on top of that. And from circulating, you have something unduly complex that no one person understands. The other issues with complexity is confusion. We have some departments where officers call us and don't understand their own program. They'll say, well, how come I wasn't assigned that job? And we'll say, well, you're on the D list, and today the order is B, D, C, so B got ahead of you, and it just causes confusion. That causes arguments, and in these departments, there's a lot of time wasted on second guessing and distrust and trying to figure out, what I need to do to be assured of getting a job, because it's complex and there's nooks and crannies in here that I can hide. The other thing you want to consider is transparency. If you have transparency, what you want in a transparent system is one where there's a 360-degree view of the details and the eligibility. Everybody knows what the details are, and everybody knows who's allowed to work what details. So if a detail is not available to me, I know that's because I didn't sign the HIPAA form at the hospital, and therefore I can't work there, or I'm not K-9 certified, and therefore I can't work a detail that requires K-9 certification. Everything's up front. Everything is known. Doing this avoids union grievances. It maintains a positive morale around the extra duty program for your staff, and it's way more efficient. There's way less time spent on explaining and second guessing. We've even had departments where chiefs have told me, I've been in a situation, the chief has been in a situation where he just paid out of his budget another officer who thought he should have got a job, who didn't get a job, because it was easier than going through a whole grievance process. And the reason he got to that point is because it wasn't a transparent system. So I want to thank everybody. We're about at the half-hour mark, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm going to turn it back over to Dom at this point.
Yes, thank you so much, Rich. Great presentation today, and I hope everybody that is still on got a ton of value from today's webinar. Now we're going to take a few minutes to answer any questions that you guys might have. So if you do have any, feel free to include that in the chat box below, and we will do our best to answer all the questions there. So we're just going to go ahead and hang on for a couple minutes, and feel free to enter those questions. And it looks like, Rich, I did have one that did come in here. Maybe you could answer for the group. This is Mike from Rhode Island, and Mike is asking, our department doesn't have an extra duty program right now, but it looks like they want to start one. So his question is, what are the first factors to consider when you're designing a extra duty program?
Mike, thanks for being here, and thanks for that question. Yeah, if you don't have one and you're building one from scratch, you're in a good situation, because you don't have the baggage of years of band-aided approaches to an inefficient program. So again, I would strongly come back to those two principles of transparency and simplicity. So I would suggest that you use a simple point system or rotation list. And it's important to think, Mike, how you're going to operationalize it. So if you're going to be administering the program yourself or internally, you're not going to use a managed service like our company to administer the program. How are you going to operationalize it? Typically, if you're using a rotation list or a point system, you're using some type of software to do that. There's a lot of software out there. A lot of it's not that good. You want to make sure that with the software that you're using allows you to employ the simplicity and transparency principles. So for example, do not pick a software that is not transparent to the officers. In other words, if you are going to use a rotation list and you can't see as an officer where you are in the rotation list, or you're going to use a point system and you can't see how many points you have, good job, be a good way to operationalize your program. So don't use software like that if you're going down that path. Thanks again, Mike, for that question.
Sure, and it looks like we have another one coming in, Rich. This is Jeff from New Jersey. He's saying the department where the officers are actually assigning the jobs. Have you ever seen any issues or complications with this?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so what you're referring to, Jeff, is internal coordinators. This is not uncommon. It's more common in the South and out West, where details tend to be more security, less road jobs. It's less common up North, where details tend to be more last-minute road jobs than security. I would say in 97% of the time, a coordinator model will work fine. For those of you who don't understand the coordinator model or have never seen that, if I'm a sworn officer and the hospital is quote unquote my customer, I am the count rep, if you will, for the hospital. So if the hospital has questions concerning billing or which officer, I don't want this officer working here, they would come to me. And I would be the one to determine who is permitted to work at the hospital. And I am the one to determine when each of those people works and when they don't work. So a lot of times this can be an efficient way for a department who wants to administer their own program to handle the workload. The issue that comes from it, though, is that you're putting somebody in a position of power and therefore in a position of temptation. So we've seen plenty of examples where coordinators have taken advantage of this. So we've seen examples where a coordinator said, yeah, if you want to work at the hospital, I'll take $10 off the top for each hour. We've seen, kickbacks. We've seen indictments around coordinator indiscretion. So if you're going to use a coordinator model, you definitely want to have checks and balances and guardrails around it to protect against anything like that. Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Great, looks like we have a few more questions in here. This one's from John. John asks, when we cannot fill a job, we use another agency to fill those jobs. How does that work with you as far as assignment and paying that agency?
Yeah, so that's not uncommon at all for agencies to have MOUs between each other and agree to work in each other's areas. So in our world, we have, I'll give you an example. In New Jersey, we have a whole team, an account team that does nothing but shift jobs around based on what agencies have overflow. In other words, they can't handle all their jobs that day, and what agencies don't. In other words, they can handle other agencies' jobs. There's a multitude of ways this can work, but typically the way it works is the home agency who has the job has a point system or rotation list that's run. It's discovered that nobody wants or nobody can work the job in question. And at a certain time each evening that's determined by the department, we then call the other agency or other agencies, as it may be, in a predetermined order set by the department and offer that to them. So we might call the first agency and say, we have 3 openings here in this town. Can you call me back within a half an hour or 1 hour and let me know if you guys want any of these? That department may take 2. And then we call a second department and say, we have 1 opening left. Do you want to take this one? And they take that one. As far as the payment goes, the officer from the neighboring agency, in some cases, gets their own rate, whatever that neighboring agency's rate is. And in some cases, must take the home agency's rate. It just depends on the memorandum of understanding or the agreement between those 2 agencies. And as far as when we do that, we are typically invoicing the customer for both officers or officers from even 3 departments on 1 invoice, and they like that because they're not getting 2 or 3 invoices. And then we pay the neighboring agency for that officer. So typically the neighboring agency will send us an invoice and that's how we know how much to pay for the officer. Or what works even better is that neighboring agency will be on our system. And even if they're not our customer, that's fine. We have multiple agencies who are not our customers who we put on our system so that when we do have an overflow for that neighboring agency, we can communicate it out in an efficient manner and don't need to disturb their dispatch with that. Thanks.
Okay, and it looks like we have a few more in here. We'll try to answer as many as possible. This one's from David. In your experience, a department of approximately 60 officers, what do they do to reset the point count, quarterly or yearly, etc.?
The most common, if you're using a point system and you go to 0, I would say 75 to 80% of departments go to 0 once a year, and it's January 1st. And then the other 25% or so are doing it quarterly or monthly. And the real determining factor there is, do you consider the Christmas money problem to be a problem or not? So in some departments, there is absolutely no issue and it's not considered unfair or any problem at all if a subset of officers don't want to work in the summer months, don't want to work, beginning of the year, and everybody knows they're going to have no points in the fourth quarter, and they're going to get their pick of the litter, as many jobs as they want, because everybody else has been working all year and they haven't. In some departments, that's not looked upon favorably, and it's looked upon that, well, if somebody's out there on a 12-hour road job in the middle of summer sweating, they shouldn't be dinged at, in the wintertime just because they were willing to take jobs in the summer. So those departments tend to go to zero monthly or quarterly. Again, there's no right answer. It just depends on what you think is right for your department and what types of jobs that you tend to get. Thanks.
We have another real good question coming in from Richard. How are program costs calculated? We have 1,000 sworn officers. What is the transitional process from in-house to vendor administered system?
Well, let me break that into two parts. One is the costs. So the costs of running an extra duty program, whether it's in-house or out-of-house, is kind of the same. Your main costs are somebody's taking all these phone calls and explaining the rates to the customers, putting out jobs, whether that's in software or manually. So in a department of 1,000, you're probably going to have a few people doing that. You're going to have some type of software or electronic system that you're going to have to pay for to operationalize this. Doing this on paper and pencil with 1,000 officers, I can't imagine how complex that would become. You're going to have the cost of finance. So somebody is preparing invoices and sending the invoices out. Somebody is making collection calls. Usually that's not in a department, that's usually on the city side of things. So those are the most obvious costs. Those are the costs that you see right in front of your face, the labor costs and the associated benefits with that labor. But there are other costs that are not right in front of your face that are still costs. One, which is a biggie, often bigger than the labor costs, is float costs. So if an officer works a detail and gets paid at the end of the payroll period, let's say that's next week, and the customer doesn't pay for 2 months, the city is floating that customer an interest-free loan for 2 months for the amount of that detail. That can be tens of thousands of dollars that's being floated, and money is not free. And it's very rare that I meet a CFO that can say, "Here's my float costs. I calculate it." It's usually hidden. It's muddied up with other costs. So it's not real obvious what that float cost is. Another cost is bad debts. So every now and then you're going to have some landscaper that goes out of business the week after a detail, and the city's not going to get paid. And then there's other costs like insurance costs. So we had one department that we started with that before we started, they wanted to figure out what does it cost them to run their program, and they guessed it would cost about $100,000 because our fees for administering their program, if they hired us, which they did, would have come out to about $100,000 a year. When they did the calculations of all those facets that I just talked about, they realized they were spending $330,000 a year to run the program and losing a ton of money on it. So that's the aspects of cost that you would want to consider. As far as the second part of the question of moving from on-site to an administrative approach, like a managed service, like what we do, the steps are in a larger department, and you certainly have a larger department, there's going to be a communication process that should not be overlooked. This is very important. So you're going to have to handhold some of the officers or groups of officers or all the officers through the process and explain, why are you doing this? Why are you moving to a managed service? What are the benefits? And ensuring that officers realize nothing's going to be taken away, or they're still going to get paid perhaps quicker than they would otherwise have been paid. But that process of handholding is very important to avoid mutiny. Also on the larger clients, typically in a bigger department with an established program, you're going to have hospitals or 6 Walmarts or churches that are long-term customers that want to also make sure that they're going to be serviced the same way they were serviced or better, and that they have nothing to worry about. That's a very important part of moving from in-house to a managed service approach. We also, when we move from in-house to a managed service, it's important to note that we don't change anything. So what I mean by that is, it's your rules, it's your rates, it's your scheduling algorithm. If you want advice from us, if you want us to tell you what we see in other places, we're happy to do that. But one of the things that we do if we do move in to do a managed service is come to your department and have what we call the knowledge transfer meeting. In a department of 1,000 people, that might be 3 or 4 hours with pizza or barbecue, depending on where you are in the country. But in the knowledge transfer meeting, we have to learn all the nooks and crannies of your program and how you want it to work. So what are your rates? Are your rates different if it's Saturday and national holiday, it's a lieutenant and a liquor job? What are the cancellation policies? What are the cancellation policies if it's raining? All those types of pieces, of facets of information we get. We come back and customize what we do for your department, your rules, your rates, and then we go through that education process I talked about. We do on-site training for the officers on our software. We reach out to clients either in person or with letters to tell them what the change is going to be. Here's the new phone number, here are the new rates, here's the new email address, and then we're ready to go. That whole process in a department of 1,000 people might take 6 or 7 weeks. And every piece of that is important, especially the internal communication. A lot of departments kind of, there's a tendency to rush over that, and that's not something we want to do.
All right, great. It looks like we're coming to the end here, guys. If you do want to schedule your one-on-one meeting to get any answers or any answers to any questions that you may have asked, we'll be happy to do so. Yep. And then it looks like we have one more question here before we go. If you are interested in that one-on-one, just make sure to let us know. David, I see you already asked that, so we'll definitely get you set up with that. Last question for today is, how much do you guys charge here at Extra Duty Solutions to the department?
Yeah, our service does not cost the department or the municipality anything. We charge the customers an admin fee. So if Verizon, for example, was going to get $1,000 invoice, they may now get an $1,100 invoice. Our rates depend on your rates. The lower your officer rates are, the higher our percentage fee is, and the higher your rates are, the lower our percentage fee is. Our percentage fee typically tends to be around 10%, but we have some departments in very large municipalities that are, close to $100 an hour. Our percentage fee is lower there. And then we have some departments where officers are making 27, 28 an hour, and our percentage fee might be 12.5% there. So, but the key is we don't charge you anything. There's no charge for training. There's no charge for upfront. If you don't like us and you want to get rid of us, there's no charge for that. And our general contract is month to month, so we don't tie you up for a 3-year commitment or something like that. But thanks for that question.
Okay, great. And this about wraps it up here for today. I want to thank everybody again for joining us for today's webinar. We hope you guys got a ton of value today, and we look forward to speaking with you on your one-on-one consultation. Hope everyone has a great day, and thanks again, guys.